Welcome back to the Mental Dietitian Podcast. I'm your host, Ahren Lynch-potter. And today's guest, I've talked about him a lot over the past 80-something episodes, 84 to be exact. And I mentioned his name a few times. The man, the myth, the legend, my good friend, my best friend, Markus. I met this man 8 years ago. We both worked at Good Life Fitness. We were personal trainers at the time. When I first met him, I thought he didn't like me because he had a mean mug of a face. And that's how our relationship started. I thought the dude didn't like me. And ever since then, we've nurtured a friendship. He is somebody I look up to more than anybody. He feels like the person that is on a similar path to me, but always a little bit further ahead, and is a friend mentor. He's been there for me in my hardest times, the rawest times of my life. And I don't want to get too emotional doing the intro, but I love this man. He's had deep initiations many times in his life, starting at a very young age when he moved from Germany at 8 years old, didn't know English very well. And now he sits here at 31 years old. My best friend. Welcome to the podcast, Mr. Markus.
You give Tom Billy a run for his money on the intros.
Dude, his intros are the best. His intros are unreal. But yeah, dude, tell us about you. Tell us about you. I know all about you, and we were kind of talking about it before I hit record. For people that don't know you, try and give them a 5-minute kind of breakdown story of who you are, how you got here, what you're passionate about right now. Because we're going to talk about a few different things today. We're going to talk about death. People just turn off the podcast right away, like, fuck that. Don't want to talk about that. We're going to talk about psychedelics. We're going to talk about being a man. We're going to talk about all kinds of things, and we might not touch on it all. We might not touch on all of it, but give us a little snapshot about you for people that don't know.
Oh, man. Well, thank you for having me. It's been a while. It's been a long time in the making. I think I told you I'd be on the 7th episode. What are we at? 85? This is 85?
This is 85, yeah.
Nice. It's a good number. Yeah, so you nailed it a little bit. Beginning, I was born in Germany, Munich, Germany, just outside of Munich. I lived there till I was about 8. And then my family moved to Canada, British Columbia. And now I live off the west coast of BC on an island, which is very beautiful. Yeah, gosh, where do we even start? It's been a rocky road, first 30. A lot of learning, a lot of beauty. I was born with Spina Bifida occulta. So I had some troubles with my physical body right when I came into this world. I had a couple of major surgeries when I was still in Germany. Surgeries are a little bit different over there. I spend a little bit more time out of the healthcare system as opposed to where we are now. So I spent 3 months in the hospital. I had a major surgery on lower leg of my right side. I had to learn how to walk again. I had to learn a bunch of motor functions again, which was hard for it must have been about 5 or 6. Yeah, I was the kid on crutches and night braces and all kinds of other stuff, trying to figure out how to get back to standing on 2 legs, which ended up being a lifetime journey. So yeah, that was my first real struggle that started to, I don't know, shape me, I guess. I guess I get to feed this into my first experience of death was the death of a family dog, getting hit by a bus. Which was really difficult. It was my first memory of my grief, first memory of loss, first memory of shame at probably about age 4 or 5. And then we moved to Canada and I got dropped into school and I knew 3 words. And the way that school system functioned back then, a little tiny school in a little tiny town, we had a sister school across town. And what I didn't know was that half the kids go to the newer school to do computer class. And then the second half of the day, they would switch. So I show up to the old school And I start to get, comfortable with the, 10, 15 kids that were in there and trying to figure out faces and how to navigate, not having a clue how to speak the language. And a few hours goes by and I get a little bit more comfortable with where I am and where I'm at. And then recess happens. So we go outside, we go for recess, and I'm trying to figure out school schedules and things. And I come back in after recess, walk into the same classroom, and now there's 15 brand new faces. And I felt unbelievably lost. It turns out that the other school and this school has switched their classes. And me, poor little Marcus, trying to figure out how to navigate his world. So yeah, learning this language, being an immigrant, figuring it all out was difficult. And yeah, that's how I got here. That's how I started. And then as I started growing older, what started me on my path was my physical pain. So as I started going through puberty and started aging and getting taller, and bones and things were starting to lengthen, my spina bifida really started to show up in its full force. So I had a lot of chronic pain starting at about age 13. Debilitating pain, couldn't get out of bed some days, not a clue why, no idea. My parents did their best, but it was limited. And that eventually pushed me into a direction of understanding human movement, human health, human bodies, rehab, prehab, physio, performance. I ended up getting a degree in kinesiology from the University of British Columbia. And then I started personal training in 2012, I think. And my personal training road, similar to those who start early, same as yours, get in there, start getting some clients, start figuring it out, working with people. And I did that for about 3 years, and I got pretty bored of it. And I wanted to have more out of it, and I didn't know how to get more. And so I started mixing it with a passion of mine. And as I left football behind in high school, I started picking up golf again. And so I started mixing golf with movement and health and fitness. And that was kind of a booming thing that was happening in the golf world to begin with. And so then I moved to the island and that I live on now. And I started working out of a gym here, who our mutual friend, Jeff Dallin, who's been on the show, ran, still runs. And I started doing movement training for golfers. And that lasted 3 or 4 years until I started really diving into biomechanics, human movement, understanding human evolution. How do we get to be able to move the way that we do now? Started becoming really interested in, nature, walking, running, throwing, the things that we evolved to do from an evolutionary perspective, and started gearing my training towards that. And then as I started keep diving down that road, I started learning more about anxiety and depression and how a lot of it is rooted from the imbalances that we have in our body. And so working our way back to symmetry and respecting the fundamental processes that made us humans started to decrease a lot of anxiety, started to decrease a lot of pain. And it was kind of just this, loophole into understanding that there's far more to health and pain than just lifting weights, putting on muscle, and looking a certain way when you see yourself in the mirror. So that's my first big step in health. Somewhere along the way, I was a college student dabbling in things. I never smoked, never drank anything heavily. When I was in high school, I was really dedicated to my craft and football. And then in school, I started becoming introduced to other things, substances, psychedelics, cannabis, and I had a pretty rough experience with psilocybin one night that changed everything. And we can talk about it if we want to. But I almost lost my life, and it changed my whole perspective on life, death, the meaning of it, why we're here. It opened up, I don't know, I don't like using the word portal, but it opened up a little bit of a portal to understanding that there's a lot more going on here than we are privy to. But it was also horribly traumatic. And it took me at least 5 years to find my feet again. And I always knew, because I had this experience happen inside of a psychedelic realm, that there was always an itch about having to go back into that realm to being able to really understand what happened. And so I found some help. or at least I put some feelers out there for help, and eventually it was answered. And I found a community that I started to do some healing work in, with the use of medicines, but guided in professional help to being able to go into some of those dark corners and figure out what's driving some of these past behaviors and these traumas and other things. And so that started a real deep dive for about, oh gosh, it's been how long now? 5 years, 4 years?
Yeah, around that.
Real deep diving of sitting in medicine and understanding who we are and discovering things. And through that, I learned all of the things that I bring forward now. Integration. I'm an integration coach. So I help others integrate big experiences, whether that's death, dying, psychedelics. Some of us understand the term dark night of the soul. And if you've been through it, holy moly, you get it. If you don't know about it, probably wouldn't believe me anyway if I told you. So I help people get through that, especially some people around my age, 28 to 31. And that's been great. Love it. Love the work. I still do some health consulting in some way. And then as I step into this, the one thing that's really lighting up a lot more is death care, sacred death care. And so the death of my dog at 4, I had another really tragic death of my dog around 12. I had another really tragic death of the dog around 14. And by the time I was 30, I had a significant death on average every 2 years of my life. And so by the time my mother got diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I was pretty finely tuned for end of life and the life cycle and all kinds of other things. I lost teammates and friends and mentors and family members, my own near-death experience. And now I was standing on the doorstep of walking my mother home, which was an absolutely transformative experience as she was dying and I was taking care of her. And there was not a whole lot more than that. We had some friends and support, but it was just me and my mom, arm in arm, walking her home. And that birthed a deep dive into understanding end-of-life care, sacred death care, and the whole world that is underneath that. And so a large part of my work now is helping people find meaning at the end of life, helping people go through the grieving process, understand how to become a practitioner, an apprenticeship of grief, and really get in touch with that aspect of our emotions, because it's at the bottom of all of our traumas is unprocessed grief. And there's nothing more special than death to bring up grief. So it's a real snippet. I'm not sure I packed it into 5 minutes, but
it did pretty well, man. It did pretty well. I was like, holy shit, what a ride.
Yeah,
what a ride. And there's so much more. Like, I've known you for what? I met you January 2015. So that is next year, it'll be 9 years.
I thought it was longer than that. Okay.
It feels longer than that. Yeah. Yeah. For you, those of you who are listening, it's like, there's probably a lot of things that he said that you'd like to hear more about. And it's not going to be the only podcast we do. And we're going to go a few different directions today. One thing I did want to touch on, if you wanted to go into detail about it, that's okay. You can go into as much detail as you want. It's your life. The bad experience with psychedelics when you're in college, and what lessons that somebody else could have, what's some general principles that people can have that are interested in psychedelics, but also don't understand. They don't understand the consequences of it. And I always use the analogy for you Lord of the Rings fans, of you people that have watched it. There's a scene in the very first Lord of the Rings where Gandalf meets what's called a Balrog. And a Balrog is something from tens of thousands of years ago that was trapped away. And the reason why the Balrog was released is because the dwarves got too greedy and they mined too deep into the mountain. I see a Balrog as a trauma that can come out, like, metaphorically, if somebody does a bunch of psychedelics and is not doing it in a proper setting. And I like that kind of analogy. That's just my way of seeing it. but what are the principles that you could tell to somebody that does want to dive into psychedelics, wants to maybe do it at home, wants to maybe do it with friends? Tell us about that and what you learned from that experience. And yeah.
Oh man, that's a big topic.
I know.
What do I want somebody to know? First of all, I'd get really, really clear with why you're doing it. As you and I both know, these are just tools. And I think that is the most important aspect now that I think about it. They're just tools. And so you're using a tool as a means to get somewhere else. I'm not using a hammer to use a hammer. I'm using a hammer to get the nail on the board because I want to hang something on my wall. And so psychedelics are one of many ways to access a deeper understanding of self. And I think most people, they might not know it when they go into this work, but they're just looking to understand who they are and why they are. And so there's so much that I could say on this, but it's not for everybody. It's you know, the psychedelic world talks about how a good, healthy setting facilitated by professionals safely weekend of psychedelics is like 10 years of therapy in one weekend. And that's a fancy statement, but if you really think about the brain processes and things that have to happen to make 10 years of therapy happen in a weekend, there's a lot that goes on. And so it is not for everybody, and it's not recommended that everybody go down this road. Do your research, be safe about it. I do not condone that kind of avenue. It worked for me. I also learned a lot of rough lessons that way because I was using it the wrong way and abusing things. But I definitely don't recommend it. It has to be called. It's got to have an intuitive pull. I sure wouldn't do it just for fun at this point anymore. That being said, I wouldn't be able to say this if I didn't do it for fun and have my slip-ups and my problems. But my experience is very unique. I've never heard a story like mine come out of psychedelics ever in the 10 years that I've been carrying this story and have shared with some. So I'm not an average. There's an anomaly to my story. So take that all with a grain of salt. But what I've learned over the 10 years, set and setting, you know, if you don't feel safe in your setting, it's going to show up. And if you don't have any tools to manage that, it's uncomfortable. The mindset you go into it, the intention that you use, the people that you're with, how much are you using, all of those things matter. Let's riff on that.
Yeah. Set and setting is the mindset you have going into it. And obviously the setting is the environment, the container that you're in. And when you're not, if you go into these spaces with a mindset and you're not in the right place mentally, then it can not be good. Are you open to talking about what happened, or is that all? Like, how much do you want to go into the story, like the actual details of what happened?
I mean, I can talk about it. I've gotten in the right relationship with it. The other thing I'd say, just to add to that point, is don't do them alone.
Yeah,
especially if you're new. Do not do them alone. Find professional help. Your friends are not professionals, even if they've done them 2 or 3 times more than you have. Find professional help. Do it properly. The laws are changing. The opportunities are coming. The companies that I work with in the States are able to facilitate this in some way now, with ketamine therapy being available and MDMA is coming. And so just do it safely. Here's why, if we go this way. I don't go into the details of this. This story is not mine alone. There's another party member involved that I want to respect his experience and name and all the things. And it took me 10 years to take full responsibility of this story, realistically. So I can leave him out with and be able to tell the story without any issues. But essentially, we took a really high dose of psilocybin, a dosage that I would not recommend to anybody. And after a series of really rough 4 hours, I tried to take my own life with a butcher knife. And after 33 slashes to the throat and abdomen, I died in my living room. And after some divinely orchestrated series of events, I survived. And it, like I said, left me really shattered. Yeah, it was my roommate had a hard time with that dosage and tried to access some things that are not necessarily accessible from this world. And it led to a pretty bloody ending. And it taught me a lot about more is not better. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Set and setting matters. Who you're with matters. The health and mental stability of the people you are involved with matters. But I also learned a lot over the years of dissecting that, of where can I take responsibility for this? Because if I did tell you all the details of the story, this wasn't my idea. But I did get roped into something. And I had to take responsibility for how I got roped into that and what led up to the events where my consciousness thought that might be a good idea when the time was presented and the opportunity was given. And that uncovered a lot of conditioning, traumas, unmet needs over the lifetime. All of the stuff that I'd been through had started to bubble to the surface to the point where I actually didn't want to be here. I just didn't know it until it was accessible for me. And then I took the opportunity. But again, I was a few moments, a few heartbeats away from not coming back. And on the spiritual side of things, I did separate body and soul. And that experience was one that I'll cherish forever because it shined a little bit of light on what's on the other side, which changes the perspective of when it comes into my life, meaning death. So I got to meet death face on, and it alleviated all of my fears of it, which was a beautiful gift inside of the terror that happened that night. But as I started learning more and researching more, I started to learn more about sacrifices, sacrificial things. There's a lot of traditions that believe sacrificing of blood is how we gain wisdom. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do think it's really interesting to look back at the events that happened that night and all of the wisdom over the last 10 years that I've gained from it and other things. And so it helped me really create a lot of meaning. It helped me anchor into why I'm here. And it helped me do a lot of things. And so I get to now turn around and start sharing this with people in ways that hopefully is impactful.
Mm. What does it feel like to die?
I don't know. It's your experience.
For you, your experience, because we don't have that experience. Maybe other people listening to this maybe do have some kind of experience. My mum shared with me that she went flatline on a table in a hospital once because she was I think she was allergic to some medication they gave her. And she saw them resuscitating her from a bird's eye view perspective. And she was like, all the pain was gone. She was like, oh. And then she got sucked back into her body and was like, that's her experience. She shared with me. And that really impacted me. I was like, that's very interesting. What was your perspective? I've already heard the story personally, but what did it feel like of actually feeling yourself dying? And like, just share that with us, if you will.
Yeah, the experience of seeing like floating above your body is very common when you look at near-death experiences. And one of my teachers in this space does a really beautiful job of laying out the levels of things that our soul goes through before it crosses and doesn't come back. And there are like 3, 4, 5 levels. And the floating above the body, seeing all the doctors doing the CPR and plugging stuff in, and that's very common. It's a similar experience that I had. Like I got to float above the room and see all the paramedics and police officers and firefighters and all the people in my house, and me laying on the floor, puddle of redness. But I also got to look down at my body, but I also got to look up into the white light and the tunnel that people kind of reference when they go in and come back and go and share about it. But to answer your question, like, it was an act of trying to escape my reality. And so it was very peaceful because I got to escape my reality. I got out of the horror house. So there was a sense of relief, for one. Two, I was high as hell on substances. And so it also felt very warm and fuzzy and good. The emotional aspect of it was horrible, because I knew what was happening and I didn't want it to happen. Yeah, it was not great. I was screaming last words and crying at the top of my lungs to my best friend who was trying to save my life. And I was just screaming and yelling at him. So emotionally, it was very difficult because I knew it was going to happen and I wasn't ready for it and I didn't really want it to happen. But physically, I felt at euphoric, peace, calm, lovely. I had a friend trying to save my life, was packing pillows and blankets around me, so I felt comfortable and fuzzy. Even the separation part was just it's like you hear people talk about it all the time. We're going home. Like, going home is a gentle feeling. It's this here on earth is the vacation. When we stop, we go back home. And that's a lovely feeling. Same with my mom when she was passing. She's said a few things in her last days that made it seem very apparent that she was very happy to go home. So just, it's hard. It's like anything with these experiences. They're hard to put into words. It's more of a felt sense, but it's peaceful. It's comfortable. I think everybody gets to that point. It's just a matter of, if you get hit by a bus, do you get to that point? I think so. But if you're also dying in cancer in bed for a long time, do you get to that point? I also think so. It's just the precursors leading up to it might be less enjoyable than others. And mine was pretty horrific. So, and it was a lovely experience. And the closest thing that I've ever been to it was medicine, which is really interesting, which actually kept me closer with medicine, because in the months and almost the years leading up to or after my experience, my near death, I was so enthralled with the experience of dying that I was fantasizing about how to actually commit suicide and like leave a note for friends and say, like, don't be sad. Like, I actually want to do this.
This was fucking awesome. Like, that was amazing. I want to go back.
The other side looks really sweet. So like, I just check out early and just hop over there for a while. Obviously I knew I couldn't do that. So it took me a long time to find my feet until I found my first medicine experience that gave me the same feeling, but on this side. And that I understood was from a substance, but it also made me realize that you can find this experience on this side. And that kept me here, and it kept me wanting to be here and keep searching and finding myself and all the things that come when you start to dive into your own work. But I was really enamored with the other side, and I wanted to get to it faster than I was allotted. Yeah, but peaceful, super peaceful.
Yeah, it's so interesting because so few people have any kind of experience like that. Yeah, it's a privilege to be able to for you to share that, to actually be close enough with somebody that I get to hear a story like that.
Well, think about how many people in your life that you've heard die, like close friends, family, extended, and then just random people in Iraq and other things that you've heard over the world. Like, we've heard of millions of people dying in our lifetime. Maybe not millions, but a lot. And now think about, are you any more skilled at your own death because of what you've learned from all of those other people? the answer most likely for many people is no. We just witness it,
Yeah.
hear about it,
We
but we never ever allow that process to teach us how to do it. And I
Yeah,
think,
like how do you die? Like that's an interesting question. Like, do you know how to die? Imagine just going like, hey, excuse me, sir. We're just doing a survey. It's a beautiful Saturday morning. Do you know how to die?
yeah, I would think most people would
People
just,
would be shook, dude. That would be a very interesting, but like doing it in a nice way. Like we're asking questions about just life and death, things like that. Do you know how to die? Well,
well, the thing is, like, everybody does, and everybody does it every single day. They're just not aware of it. But when you close your eyes at night and say goodbye to the day and fall asleep, it's the same process. There's an active letting go to the point where you let go so much that you slip away.
mm,
Wake up again in the morning. But the process is very similar. And when I watched my mother die, it was very beautiful to watch her struggle to hang on to this life and struggle to hang on, and struggle to hang on. And then eventually she
just let
struggled a
go.
little less. She struggled a little less. And then eventually she accepted it. She let go. And the moment she let go, she was gone very quickly after, like days. Some people do it minutes before they die. Some people do it months or years before they die. But everybody gets to that point where they just let go. And when that resistance, like, you don't have to do anything, you have to do less. Stop holding on. It's the same concept that we've learned through medicine about letting go. It's the same
Yeah.
concept of acceptance. It's the same concept about all those things. Death is no different. We do it all the time. We do it at the end of the day. We do it at the end of conversations. We do it at the end of vacations. We do it when somebody dies. We do it when whatever, when we have our favorite mug in the morning and we're about to pour our cacao and we drop the mug on the ground and it shatters. Like, it's the same thing. And we just let it go. And it's about doing less than doing more.
Yeah. There's a lot of peace that can be found just letting go, and my own journey of letting go. And that's what Buddhism talks about. It's like, it's not about not owning it. It's not about like not owning anything. Like some people get so far, like, no attachments. I will be utterly detached. It's like, no, it's like, it's about having nothing own you. And there's so many people that create suffering because they can't, they're so clinging to whatever it may be. It could be a relationship, a job, a pet, whatever it may be, that they won't let it die because it's always going to die. Everything is temporary. Everything comes and goes. And we look out into nature, and you know this, but people that are listening to this, it's like everything dies. Summer dies. Summer's in the process of kind of dying right now. And we get then, and now fall is being born, and then that will die, and it will go into winter, and then winter will die, and then spring will come, and it's always happening. Why? I mean, I already know the answer to this question, but I want to hear your perspective. Why do people struggle so much when you just bring up the topic of death?
I don't know.
Yes, you do.
I've
Like,
been
what do you think?
yeah, of course I know. It's hard to look at. You know, through our spiritual work, we've learned that the more you identify with ego, the harder that conversation is going to be. The
Yeah, I was going
more,
to say that. Is it ego? Is it because people think who they are is their ego?
right? And you know, there's all the listeners have ego is such an abstract word. Every you say ego in a group of 1,000 people, every person's going to define that differently. But as we understand it in this death lens, the more you identify with the material world, the harder it is to have a conversation about death, because death means that material world no longer exists. But if you identify and you do your spiritual work to a level where you start to understand that you are just the awareness of what is happening, awareness is never ending. Awareness is infinite. And when you start to really orient yourself around identifying with being the loving awareness, as Ram Dass says, there is no end. They're just transitions. And then, you sprinkle on top some learnings about the soul's journey, about how, some people call it contracts, some people call it whatever, dharma. We come into this life to learn something about a specific way of being. When that life is over and those lessons may or may not have been learned, we go back home, we recuperate, we rest, we pick a new life, and we continue. So if I identify with the Marcus who's got black hair and wearing this and has these tattoos and has the lamps and the whatever else, that dies at the end. That is going to make me really nervous. But if I identify the one who's aware of everything that's going on and everything that's around, then my awareness just comes with me as I transition. And that can change a lot of the fear. But most people, as you know, especially in our culture, like dominant Northwest culture, we identify with the people, places, and things. And so now you have a conversation about death. The first thing people think about is that they're going to lose their people, places, and things. And then what's left? Well, I don't know.
Then, yeah. That's why so many people are so afraid of aging and getting older, and like even me losing my hair. And sometimes part of me is like, oh, maybe I should get a hair transplant. And I'm like, but that's just, it's a clinging of like,
right.
It's a clinging. Like I have white hairs in my beard. I see them. Maybe we can see them on camera. Maybe. No, the camera's pretty good. I don't know why it's not showing them. But I've got gray hairs here. I've got gray hairs on my chest that are starting to come through. And I'm noticing myself getting older. And I have wrinkles here. And I have a wrinkle here from frowning. And it's interesting watching yourself die. Because that's what's happening. It's like you're slowly dying. Very slowly. And yeah, a lot of people really struggle with that because of they identify with people, places, and things. That's very interesting. How can somebody that's listening to this, that is finding this conversation really interesting, what's something that they could maybe do in a daily practice or just some kind of perspective or some kind of tangible tool that you would recommend people that do or explore so they can start letting go of the fear? I don't know. I find that I think about it every day. I think about death every day. I think about what helps me love more is looking at Lexi and looking at my cats and knowing, especially my cats, especially like Flynn and Floof, like all of them. I'm not going to make favorites out of my cats. That would be a bit wild. But they're all going to disappear. And like they sleep with me every night. And I consciously, every night, I think I'm like, one day this cat won't be here next to me. Its fur pushing up against my skin, the warmth of this little creature that's cuddling my arm right now, it's going to be gone. And in that moment, that helps me love my cat even more. I hug them. I feel this wave of emotion, of appreciation, of being in the deep now. So that's a tool I use. Is there anything that maybe you could recommend or that you help with your clients or a perspective?
I mean, you know me, I don't answer these questions very well because what you're asking for is improvement of the symptom. And there's a process behind that has to happen for that symptom to start to become affected. And there's a lot of them when it comes to this. Like when you think about your cats not being here and you feel the emotions start to come, there is a level of integrity in you that can embrace the intensity of that present emotion.
Okay.
Hence why you can stay with it long enough to find the gratitude to be able to hug your cats and love them even more.
Yeah, a lot of people might get stuck at the start of that arc and not let the arc complete its journey.
Most people can't handle the intensity of the present moment when it comes to death. They can, most people can't do it in general. But, you said something about, how do I love my cats more? This is the big topic of conversation right now is you don't love more by trying to love more. Let me know how that works. Like most people don't have good experiences with that. The way that you really change it is you get better at grieving. because the only reason that you don't love more is because you're at the ceiling of your capacity to handle the grief when whatever you're loving is no more around.
So
And
it's
so,
like the opposite ends of a like a seesaw almost. Is that what you're painting here?
so the one of my teachers, my beautiful teachers, the valve opens both ways. You cannot be more sensitive to pleasure without being more sensitive to pain. And so let's just put some framework around this. If I love you, okay, let's say this. If my capacity to handle grief is at a 2 out of 10, I am not going to love you at a 6 out of 10, because that means my grief needs to be able to handle 6 out of 10. And if I can only get to 2, the next 4 notches are going to completely rock and destabilize me. And we know that psychologically under our deep unconscious mind. So if my grief only goes to 2, my love's only going to go to 2. Because if it goes to 3, whenever I lose it, I'm going to get stressed in my grief meter, because we're so death phobic and grief illiterate in this culture. We put a ceiling on our capacity to love, not because we can't and don't want to love more. We are love. Like, we don't have to do anything to be love. We have to manage the grief that comes when whatever we're loving comes to an end, which it no doubt will. And so getting better at the intensity of the emotions allows you to be with any kind of meditation at the end of your deathbed, or any kind of long pondering over the fact that my cats aren't going to be here anymore. Like, you're not going to allow yourself to feel those things if you don't know how to feel those things. You're going to traumatize yourself by trying to love your cats more, because you're trying to get better at, like, so the work becomes, this is the beautiful teachings of Francis Weller and Stephen Jenkinson, is become a practitioner of grief. If I can't metabolize what arrives at my door, then I have to live very strategically to avoid any kind of encounter with my life.
Pause there. Rewind that and listen to that again. You listening to that? If your life, which is going to happen, your life is going to happen. If you don't have the capacity to be able to feel what life is going to throw your way, then you will actively avoid living your own life.
Right. And so now you got all kinds of, avoidant things, addictions, whether doesn't matter what your addiction is, you're using it to get away from the present moment, because the intensity of being present with whatever's happening is too much. So we need to dampen it. We need to move away from it. We need to live in the future, live in the past. The goal to any of the answers or any of the questions that you're going to ask me is get better at being present with your life. And the moment you step into presence with your life, you're going to feel the stuff that you've been avoiding, because it's right there waiting for you to be with it. And so how do you get better at having a conversation around? Just have the conversation. Your death it doesn't mean you any harm. It's your most loyal companion. It's there all the time, walking with you, waiting for you, being with you. Just turn and face it. Or it's going to make itself so prevalent that you have to turn and face it. And that's usually what people come across at the end of life. Like, okay, well, it's here now. It's in the room. It's sitting on top of my chest in my bed. Like, I can't ignore it anymore. But if you do that before, it's like the Greeks say, like, the more you practice dying, the less you have to when it's your turn.
Yeah, I've had death experiences every time I've stepped into the plant medicine space.
I got another
really scary ones, like really like the death of who you think you are.
Right. That's my other point. Like, a way to get better at handling this is to realize that it's already happened to you like thousands of times. We're just not looking at it that way. Like, when you graduated from high school, there's a death of the high school version of you. When you got your driver's license, there's the death of the person who needs to ask his parents to drive him places. When you broke an arm, there's the death of the version of you who's never broken a bone. Like, it's, you can see it everywhere. It's like you said, like it happens in the seasons. And I love
Happens
the,
every day. Like you mentioned earlier, happens every day.
happens all the time. And if you're going for coffee with somebody and you really enjoy the conversation, you know, we've all had those conversations where we're like, we could be up till 4 a.m. talking, but like you got to go at 10 because you got responsibilities. You leave, if you allow yourself to feel it, there's a grief to that conversation ending that matches how much you enjoyed it while you were in it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Even this podcast, it will come to an end. Everything comes to an end.
Think about like, we're in Canada. We got Thanksgiving weekend this weekend. Think about how many people are going to spend hours and hours and hours making food. Then they sit down with their family members, and 20 minutes later, all the food's gone. And some people, maybe not Thanksgiving is the right example, but think of a good meal where there are no leftovers and the meal's over. You only got 2 bites left. You can feel grief. It's everywhere. It's such a natural dichotomy between love and grief because they're twins. Anytime you love something, you are going to set yourself up for grief if you allow yourself, or you can stuff it down into your energetic body until it solidifies into a physical issue. And then now you deal with that. But every single time you love something, hold the grief on the other side. It's the famous quote by Francis Weller: the work of a mature human is to hold grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and be stretched large by both of them.
Yeah, that's what I do with my cats every night.
And if you only hold grief, then you're not really pleasant to be around. You can't see the beauty in life. But if you only hold gratitude, then you're not able to be compassionate with the people who are going through grief, and you become too saccharine and high.
It's so annoying to be around people that are like, I'm just grateful. Like, are you grateful, or are you just gaslighting the fuck out of yourself? Like, I'm grateful. I'm grateful. Like,
Yeah, clinging to gratitude because you're terrified of feeling the opposite.
yeah.
It's the same, like the umbrella terms the themes of this conversation are like, do less, just be more open to what's happening around you. And if you're not, or you're finding your own edges and capacity to be able to be with your life, then the work is how to be more with your life. And that happens slowly. There's a lot of this stuff that one of my favorite sayings is, how do you slow down to the speed of soul? Because when things happen in our life, our souls stop and our external world and our physical world continues. And the larger the gap between wherever your soul is stunted and stopping and processing and where you are in your physical world, the bigger that gap, the more anxiety, the more depression, the more confusion, the more questions of who you are and what you are. If you ever hear somebody say like, holy moly, it happened 15 years ago and it just feels like yesterday. Like, that's a great sign that your soul has not become current with where you're at now. And it's time to slow down and let it process, because the time dilation is a good signal that something is distorted and disintegrated. Because, man, I'm so grateful I've learned and landed on this work, because I think back, my mother died 2 years and 4 days ago, 3 days ago. It feels like 2 years and 3 days. And when I first realized that, I had a full emotional breakdown and release, because I recognized the work that I've done to stay with this process so that I don't create the distance between soul and physical life. It feels like 2.5 years or 2 years.
Can it feel like both? Can it feel like yesterday and also feel like a very long time ago? Because I'm thinking about what you're saying.
For sure. Of course.
There's moments in my life where I'm like, that feels very long ago, but also doesn't at the same time. I remember those feelings. I remember a feeling that's been coming up for me lately is realizing that I haven't mourned the death of the identity that I had of being. I remember the feeling, dude. It's coming back because I'm losing weight, and I allowed myself to put on weight to a certain point, and I'm watching my body come back to how it looked when I was like 21, 22. I was having a lot of steroids at the time, but I remember there's this moment that a lot of men will never feel, and it's a lot of what men chase, especially when they get into heavy weight training. They chase this feeling, and I've felt it a few times in my life. was at a music festival. It was called Stereosonic. I was about 21 years old. I just got back from Thailand. I was doing steroids at the time. I was tanned. I looked sick. I remember taking my shirt off and walking through a music festival of 70,000 people. And it was like the ego's fucking playland, dude. It was great. I had people, men, women coming up to me, just being like, dude, you look fucking nuts. And like, just that feeling of just being like, this ego is just like, oh my God, like I am so enough. But that again was me identifying with how I look and not allowing that young version of me. And a lot of people get stuck there. A lot of men get stuck there that I've seen of maybe like as they get older, like I know men that have wives and kids, but they think of the good old days as those days where there were casual sex, partying all the time. And I know so many men that get stuck there in their 50s, dude. Like you go to Kelowna, you go to Kelowna in summertime, men everywhere, 30 to 60, stuck energetically in these moments because they're not allowing that part of themselves to die. Yeah, it's very interesting. I've watched myself do that at times and almost like run away from that, of not allowing certain parts of your life to be in the past. Because for me, there's maybe a belief, not maybe, there is a belief at times where it's like, oh, you were better back then. But that belief is an egoic belief because I'm identifying with people, places, and things.
Yeah, and you're just comparing.
Yeah, which causes suffering. Yeah, it's very interesting watching, like hearing what you say and then seeing where it comes up in my life. Yeah, it's very interesting. And those of you who are listening, I'm sure if you've made it this far, congratulations. You are the people that will get a lot of value from what it is that this conversation brings. And you can probably hear there's a reason why I respect this man so much, because of what he's been through. And that, like, on this, like, what's it been now? Like 50 minutes? No, about almost an hour, maybe over an hour. That is just a snippet. This is just a snippet of the value that I've got being friends with this man. Yeah, I appreciate you, man. Thank you. Like, we're not done yet, but just thank you for the gift you just shared with just that perspective.
There's one of my clients actually brought this to me, which I love. My work is I get to learn from my clients too. There's an archetypal thing about being, in your early 20s. A lot of people, when they make it out of their 20s, it's like, congratulations, like, good grief. Me being one of them. But there's like an archetypal death that a young 21, 22, 23-year-old is looking for. And because we have no initiatory elders and no framework or context or language for any kind of soul growth in our culture, a lot of those young men get confused with physical death and ego death. And a lot of people take their young life because of that struggle. Me being included in that in some way. We're looking for an ego death. We're looking for maturation. Our soul is looking for the initiatory process that moves us from adolescence into adulthood or becoming a man. And we don't have that in this culture, but we crave it on a soul level. And most young people who struggle with this are confusing the desire for an ego death with not wanting to be here altogether. And a lot of people take their life because of it. And it's super sad.
Yeah, there's a lot of suffering. There's a lot of suffering in young people.
There's a similar thing that happens to females when it comes to maturing and how they relate to their parents when they become old enough to have any kind of sexual juices running through their bodies. There's a separation that happens in the same way. it's a different conversation. I won't go into that, but it's a huge thing that we don't have elders. We don't have initiatory processes that actually really create an evolutionary, change, as opposed to just these pseudo initiations that we have in our culture. And I won't name them because they're very triggering for people, but a lot of the stuff we participate in that we think is initiatory is not. It's just giving young boys more power without the responsibility, and that creates a lot of issues.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of what has led us to the path that we are on, is helping people come home to themselves, and especially men. My big passion is men, because I see a lot of people, it's just because I'm a man and I have my own journey, and you're the same way, where I see a lot of men that are 40s or 50s and they haven't been initiated. So they still don't feel like a man. One of my clients the other day asked me, he's like, when did you first feel like a man? And I was like, that's a very interesting question. I remember when I was 15 and lost my virginity, I felt like a man. I remember when I turned 18 and I could go to the bar, I felt like a man. I remember when I walked through that music festival, I felt like a man. I remember when I first made $5,000 in a month, I felt like a man. I remember when I moved to Canada, I felt like a man. I remember when I got assistant fitness manager job, and Dylan Campanero, great human being, he hired me, and I felt like a man because I was a manager. I was 21, 22 years old, 23 years old, something like that. My first plant medicine experience, felt like a man. I got
Do
getting
you notice the common thread in all of those?
the common thread is external things.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's what I was saying. It's just like, what is feeling like a man? And I was describing this. Like, that's a very interesting question. I remember when I make $100,000 in a year, I was like, I'm a man. I remember these feelings like, well, I'm a man. It's like, well, what does that mean? And I see a lot of men, especially, that's just like, especially in jiu-jitsu, I see it. They come in, they are not, they don't have the skill set yet, but watching them grow, they come more into themselves because they've done something that is hard. They've been microdosing discomfort every single day by showing up to the gym, by getting their ass kicked, but then having a community of other men that are like, hey, man, good job today. I really liked how you did that. The supporting, loving community where you're all trying to get better at something. And seeing people transform. I've seen men transform from scared little boys to confident men in a year of doing jiu-jitsu. And that's just my experience. I'm biased around that. But yeah, like, how would you answer that question? Hey, Marcus, when did you first feel like a man? And what does being a man feel like? And what does it mean?
Um, Again, it's like when I thought I felt like a man,
Yeah.
or
Yeah, that was my point. I thought I felt like a man. I was like, I'm a fucking man. It's like, no, you're not.
right.
But I was at the time. In a way I was and also wasn't.
Um, I don't know how to answer that. I'll give you my latest experience that was the deepest and probably the most solidifying of it all. As you know, I went through a pretty hard breakup at the beginning of this year. And it was one of those relationships where the same things were held up for me to see in my own mirror, but they were finally held up in a way where I could actually see them. And I was starting to teach a workshop. I was putting together a workshop for a company that I work with on men's health. And I have lots of experience around holistic health. I have lots of experience around, biological health and movement. And I had some experience around, archetypal stuff, men's archetypal health and all these things. But my main thing was that I was really feeling like an imposter while I was getting this course ready. The funny thing is when the course launched and I started teaching the workshop, only 15 females showed up and not a single guy, which I thought was super interesting. As I was building it, I felt uncomfortable. I felt like an imposter. I felt uncomfortable and I wasn't really sure why. And so I was in a deep grieving period from this relationship. I was trying to metabolize all the things that were going on in that. And I was watching, this was April. So I was watching the Masters golf tournament online on TV. And there's a 25-year-old kid, I say that word intentionally, who was hitting the putt. And the announcer goes, I guess maybe he makes the putt, but he makes a reference to the guy, the player, as a man. And I thought, he's 25 years old. Like he's 6 years younger than I am. And here he is being called a man. And I thought, wow, that resonated in a weird way. I took my dog and went for a walk in the piss and rain at the time. And like most of my really good downloads, they hit me when I'm going for walks. And I recognized that I have never actually looked at myself as a man. And it was just this, you know what it's like to get a download. It comes through your body and it ripples like lightning. And it's, once you get used to that feeling, it's undeniable. And so I started reflecting and thinking like, okay, well, how do I look at myself? I mean, I don't look at myself as a kid, like, okay. And after some sorting and some moving through that, I recognized that I had been looking at myself as somebody who's just been through a lot. There was no reference to, am I a kid, an adolescent, a child, a man? Like, what am I? It was just this badge of honor of I've been through a lot and I'm figuring out what to do with it. And that helped me recognize that, okay, it doesn't matter what I'm looking at myself as, I'm not viewing myself as a man. And so I came home and for the next few weeks, I dove in, as you know, I do really hard into some of this stuff. And I started looking into things and started researching. And I read a few really beautiful books that started to teach me about the archetypes that are within me that I could tap into and nurture that would then hypothetically bring forward more of this feeling. I started stepping into a role of what archetypally what it means to be a man. And this all happened really beautifully because I went, I had an ayahuasca ceremony a few weeks later. And sure enough, obviously, my first experience or first night was all about this. And in my medicine experience, I was recognizing that I had been asking everybody in my life to solve my own problems. And I was not taking responsibility for my life on the level that I wanted to or was being invited to. And so I spent basically 2 nights in ceremony having to feel the disempowering energy of giving my power away, asking everybody else to solve my problems. And it was very, very uncomfortable. But I got to see it from a perspective of, oh, okay, this is what I'm doing. So a part of, for me, what it means to be a man is to take responsibility for your things.
Yeah.
But I wasn't doing it. I was doing it, but not on a deep level. And so I got to go through this little mini initiation of having to beg every important person in my life and have them tell me no and give it back to me. And then I had to learn how to metabolize that and show up. And after that experience, I felt like I understood what it meant to be a man. And now my integration was to continue to practice this. And 2 days later, I taught the workshop. And then I got to teach an 8-week-long workshop that really just allowed me to continue to integrate these pieces. And after a 2 or 3 month process, I had moved through what felt like this personalized, higher self-guided initiation into being a man. And that was my latest. There's lots of other ones in there that were really pseudo. I felt like a man when I was a high school star quarterback for my team, but it really wasn't. I was just a boy with power that didn't know what to do with it.
That's a big one right there. Men thinking they're men, but you're just a boy with power.
It's the pseudo initiation. It's, the true markings of a boy is that they want to dominate over others. The true markings an aspect, I shouldn't say the true, an aspect of the true markings of a boy is that they want dominance over others. And one of the markings of a man is that that's not the case. They become generative, they become affirming, they become, loving in a way that doesn't put us above others. They become inclusive. They become, the real word that resonated a lot for me is they become generative. Like my actions create more abundance. The little boy wants love for himself, whereas the man knows how to inspire love for everyone. So those things. And I'm an intellectual, and a lot of people aren't, but I'm an intellectual. So it really helps me to learn a framework, as we were laughing before we got on this, and then step into the framework with my practices and how it resonates with me. But if I don't know that a man is supposed to be generative, then I might get there on my own as I start to, build more compassion and love within myself, and that just becomes natural. But for me, it was always helpful to be told that. And then it goes, oh, okay. Like if an elder tells me like, hey, that's uninitiated boy behavior, and this is initiated man behavior, then I can go, okay, well, let me align myself to the values of the initiated version and step into that. All the resistance that comes up as I step into that will be my work. And I've always enjoyed doing my work and my integration that way, to step into stuff and see what happens. And whatever bumps and bruises come along, those are the things that are usually needing addressing so that you can continue to walk the path. But that's my experience of late. I mean, I'm going to feel there's going to be a bunch of these initiations as I go older. I don't need to be a 45-year-old man. I don't need to be a man. I need to be a 31-year-old man.
Yep.
Right. And so I don't have kids, but one day I'm going to potentially become a father. Like that's a whole other initiation into being a man that I don't need to carry that right now. I don't need to cultivate those energies right now. I just need to meet myself where I'm at and become current. Right? Most people aren't current. They are 31 playing out 12-year-old parts, 8-year-old parts, 10-year-old parts. And the processing that we talked about earlier and the slowing down the speed of soul so the soul can process that and come up is so that you can become current. You don't need to go further. That's where you start to bump into, hustle culture stuff. Like it's not necessary. Just meet yourself where you're at. And sometimes where you're at is 10 years behind what you look like in the mirror. And that's just fine. Learn to accept yourself in that place, and then you can move. If you can't name it, you can't influence it. So you have to meet yourself where you're at first. And that's the hardest part for people. You're 45 years old, I've sat in a ceremony with people who are 60 and they're realizing they're actually only 17. Oh, now I got to meet myself where I'm at. I go backwards like 4 generations or 4 decades. Like that's really humbling.
Yeah, I've seen that too. It's so beautifully the way you said that, because I'd understood it in a way for me personally, but I didn't understand it in a way. Maybe I did. Maybe I would just explain it differently than you just explained it. But the way you just explained it really made sense to me, because I've met people who are double my age, but I'm like, I'm older than you. And it's not in a I'm better than you. It's just like, oh, you're 20 years old. But you're 45. I've met people like that. They're everywhere. And
it always blows my mind when I have clients that are in their 60s, 50s. I'm still getting adjusted to this, and it's taking time. But on a soul level, there is no age. To go back to the beginning part, I'll wrap this in, is, grief isn't there to make you feel sad. It's there to make you feel alive. And a part of metabolizing your grief or building an apprenticeship with grief, like think about an apprenticeship through college. You're doing a plumber apprenticeship. At the end of the apprenticeship, you are considered a master. Let's just use that word. You're more skilled than the rest of us, which is why I'm going to hire you to do it, because you know more, because you've done the work, you've done the apprenticeship. You have now become mastered at this skill. In soul work, grief mastery equals elderhood. So from a soul level, there's no age. And so you're not working with a 60-year-old person. You're working with their soul. And their soul is whatever age their soul is, or their soul is stuck or whatever current or wherever place they are. But my point was like, it still blows my mind when I have 60-year-olds texting me for life advice. I'm like, how is this happening? Like, you've lived twice the life that I have. How are you asking me? Like, but I have advice that is really, or whatever, coaching, information, perspectives, resources, whatever, that is really helping people of all ages.
Yeah.
And it continues to open my mind that soul work is just different than aging.
Yeah.
We have a lot of old people, but we don't have a lot of elders.
Yeah. They say that maturity comes with age, but sometimes age comes alone.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of conditioning comes with age too, which people confuse for maturity.
Yeah. Some people get more and more stuck as they get older. That's why the term like grumpy old man or grumpy old lady. And it's just why they grumpy. It's because they haven't dealt with all the decades of stuff. So they're just grumpy and bitter, and it's sad.
They're grief stricken, which is hard. They become solidified. My mom is the perfect example. I'm so damn grateful for the way she lived her life and the way she exited. The lungs are the organ that hold grief, that store grief. And my mom had a hard life. She lost her mom early. She lost her dad relatively early. She had a real rough relationship with her brothers. Her first husband, tough marriage. My dad and her divorced in an awful way. And then she had a few more stumbles with men. So by the time it was her deathbed and her son is sitting in front of her, like, she has been conditioned that men are no good. And she had a lot of grief around tragedies around men. And the lungs are the organ that store grief. And my mother never processed her grief. Well, what do you think she died from? Lung cancer, right? Because that energy is stored. Some people in the medical world will say, well, she died of lung cancer because she smoked for 40 years. Okay, well, why was she smoking? Because she was trying to numb an energy in the lungs that she couldn't process. And she was beautiful for this. I did a lot of research on this. So it's a really awesome way to bring metaphysical anatomy and things into place. But that energy gets stuck and we need to process it. And so you see a lot of these old people walking through grocery stores, and you can see it on their face that they're just grief stricken. They don't know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I even look at it within myself of as I get older, the wrinkles that I have.
Yeah, me too. My wrinkles are going crazy right now. And I'm like, whoa, I got smile lines, but I'm like, I also got like grief face lines because I've got it. And I still have a lot in me. I still have a lot to process.
Yeah, so do I. Like sometimes I look at myself and I'm like frowning because I'm like, you spent a lot of your life scared. You've spent decades of your life scared. You're scared right now. It's like, fuck. It's like, it's okay. Oh, you're anxious right now. And I look at it in my face and I'm like, here's a question. Like if anybody, if you are noticing this as you get older and you got like lines here, like a lot of people have that line there from frowning. Do you want to be that old person that has that happy old face? Because they're few and far between. But when you run into somebody that's like 80 and they got that beautiful glowing like smile face that you just look at them and it's like, I'm always struck by it. I'm like, whoa, you've had a happy life. Like there's some peace there. There's love, there's happiness. Do you want to be that old person? Or do you want to, and there's more of them, there's more of the grumpy old people. And then you look at the person, they just look bitter. And I'm like, you've spent most of your life sad, miserable, suffering, whatever, grieving or full of grief, or not even grieving. That means they're working through it. Which old person do you want to be? It's a question that I challenge and I pose to any person listening to this. What kind of old person do you want to be when people look at you? Because it is a reflection. It's a reflection of things you have done or have not done.
It's like a deeper thing of like your body is your billboard. Yeah. And I've gotten to a place where there's a few Gandhi quotes that I really love lately. And one of them is my life is my message. And I have I'm trying to assimilate my way to that as best as possible. And if my life is my message, then the wrinkles and the way my face looks is just going to be a representation of that. You know, somebody in this healing world that really helped me come to terms with this. Have you ever seen Gabor Mate's face?
Yeah.
That face has miles on it. And I love it. It's so good. And you hear his story and it's intense. There's a lot going on there, but you can see it in his face. And I think as long as you're not attached to your face looking a certain way, your wrinkles coming in and the hairs and the grays and the whatever else, then you can just sit and look at yourself in the mirror and just watch the beauty unfold. You know, it's the Ram Dass thing. Like I'm looking at a 60-year-old hand. My 60-year-old hand or just a 60-year-old hand? I don't know. I'm looking at my face. I'm just looking at a face. And I mean, that bothers me too. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, I can pull on this little part of my face here. And I'm like, oh, look, I'm dehydrated. So I get a couple good nights sleep and it doesn't happen.
Mm.
And I have smile lines, like they're crazy all over the place. I'm like, oh, look at this. Like I'm aging. It's super cool. I'm okay with that aging. The one that I have deeper attachments to that are hard on me goes back to my spina bifida, is my body hurts at a level that I'm not comfortable with sometimes for the relative age that I am. That's the work that I need to do, is to continue to let that go, because it is what it is. And I do the best to nourish it and treat it as well as I can. And whatever comes of it is what is. And I need to accept that. The other thing that I'll throw in here too, that's just coming to me, is if you're 70 years old and I'm 25, I bet you 99% of people will tell you the 70-year-old is closer to death than the 25-year-old. And that is not the case. And so there are so many things we worry about that we may not ever even live out to realization, because you might get hit by a bus in the next like 45 minutes. Then what? It's like, oh, Jesus, like, you know, you're not any closer to death because you're a certain age relative to somebody else. We have no idea when it's coming. Again, why it's so important to just stay present. Your life is in your presence. It's not in the future. Because when the future comes, it's called the present.
I think that's a beautiful way to end the podcast, what you just said. And I wanted to share a download. Speaking of downloads, I got this download last night when I was throwing some kettlebells with my friend Justin. And I think that this sums up how I feel about Markus. And we were talking about multiple lives, and we're talking about that there's only so many different combinations that makes a human being. He was talking about genetics. He's like, I think there's only 10 to 20 genetics. And he was talking about the theory of doppelgangers, of like going back. If you go back far enough, there's somebody that looks identical to you. Like very similar to you, maybe not identical, but really, really close. And it's weird. And I started thinking, I'm like, what about people that you were friends with in another life? And I had this download. I've never had this thought before, and maybe other people have. For some reason, I haven't. Thought of the concept of soul friends. It's like when your souls have been friends in a past life, and that's the best kind of friend. And if you come across that soul in this life, and you happen to be friends with them again, it's a soul dimensional miracle. It's like, holy shit, you found each other again. And that's how I feel about you. It's like, we've been like, just the conversation we've had, like there's something going on here. Like that's like feels older. That's why you're like, oh, it feels like it's been longer. It feels like it's been longer than 9 years. It's like, yeah, because it has been. So love you, man. Thank you for sharing. And this is just the start of many podcasts we're going to do together. Over however many long, who knows? We don't know.
I was wondering how much we were going to touch on in this one, and now I'm like, oh, there's a lot more.
Yeah, there's so many different directions we could go. But I love you guys that are listening to this. If you made it through the show, congratulations. It's a longer episode, but I know for a fact that if you've made it this far, there's a lot to ponder. There's a lot that has been talked about, and I know you got some value from it. We've done too much work. Both of us have done a lot of work on ourselves, and what we say will help people because it's already evidence. It's already evidence. So where can people find you? If they want to follow you, where can people follow you to keep track of what you're doing, what your offerings are, where you're going, coaching, courses, workshops? Where can people find you?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you've made it this far, reach out. Reach out to me if you've made it this far, because we can have some good conversation. You can find me on my website, universalintegration.com, universal, SOUL, integration.
I'll put it in the links. My team will put it in the links, put everything there.
Same as the Instagram page. The Instagram page is brand new, but it's about to take off with a lot of stuff. Universal.integration. That's basically it. I try to keep fairly hidden. Find me if it resonates to find me, but it's only a few billboards you can look at.
Thank you, man.
Thank you, brother.
We'll see you all next week. We'll see you all next week. If you like the show, share it, post about it on Instagram, post about it on Facebook, wherever. We're doing big things. This is just the beginning. I'm 85 episodes in. We're just getting started. Conversations like this do change the world because they change people's perceptions about themselves, and therefore they can help other people change. And then we can have a better, beautiful, more aligned world, however you want to talk about it. Love you guys. We'll see you next week.